Benchmark. Yeah, we got a new benchmark. Y'all can stop asking me now. Just kidding. Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Ethicsverse, the coolest place to be every Thursday at noon Eastern. If you believe that changing the culture of an organization can lead to better business results. We're going to be diving deep today on our brand new benchmark report. This is hot off the presses. Got a couple of quick announcements. So please drop your LinkedIn URL in the chat. Remember, we are part of a very unique industry, one that's very collegial, and you get no bonus points in life for reinventing the wheel. So let's expand that network, expand that net worth, and connect with somebody on this call today, because they probably have some solutions for any problems you might be dealing with. So take advantage of that. That's on you to change the world that you're a part of. Today, we're going to be diving, like I said, into our brand new benchmark report. Before we get started, a couple of quick announcements, okay? So on the console, you'll see that down below, you can click the button and download the benchmark report. Guess what? It's not even out now, okay? So if you've come to the Ethicsverse, you're going to get the hot off the presses, the unreleased information. So go ahead and download that. That's chock full of, round of applause, by the way, for the marketing team. You guys did a great job on this document. So thanks so much for that. But go ahead and download that. It's chock full of great tips on how to improve your metrics, which we're going to be walking through today. Hi, I'm Nick, Chief Servant and Co-CEO of Ethico. This is my brother, Gio, Spaceman Gio. How's it going, Gio?
Hey, guys.
Gio
Glad to be here on Earth
co-CEO, co-CEO and CTO of Ethico. And so glad you're here, Gio, to talk about this stuff. Allison Taylor, our friend of the family, the lovely Allison Taylor, just put this book out called Higher Ground. This book is phenomenal. I'm about 3/4 of the way through it. If you haven't checked it out yet, well, you're in the right spot, because guess how many we're giving away? Because it's benchmark day, bam, we're giving away 10. And then also, you have an opportunity we're giving away another 5. If you look on the bottom of your console, there's like a little, paper airplane. You can click that button and you can send it to other people you know in your network, other people you think might be interested in the benchmark report. So the top 5 people that send the most copies are also going to automatically get one of these books. When we've done this in the past, it seems like around, somewhere between 5 and 10 will probably get you in play. So try to shoot for that. But yeah, we're giving away 15 books today because it's benchmark day. And we are about to dive in. Before we dive in, though, I just want to, kind of frame this out. We've had over probably 1,000 conversations, literally, over the past 5 years with ethics and compliance professionals. And what I've heard time and time again is that, everybody just kind of slips off the log and falls into the ethics and compliance pool. And that is not that's not untrue for me and Gio. We joined this industry about 7 years ago. And in that time, we've seen such a massive change in things. And, this industry has really become a home for us. And as we look back on the benchmark report over the last year, we've seen some really encouraging results. So what it's kind of shown us is that there's been this real big shift in our workplace. And it's a reminder, these results are a reminder for us that employees care about the things that we care about. They care about an organization that has a noble purpose, where their voice is heard. So many of the things that we've been working for in this industry for the last 20 years are now in the hearts and minds of the employee base. And employees have shown us that they're willing to vote with their feet. They'll leave an organization where they don't have a voice, where they don't feel those values are authentic. And in this environment that we're in, the role of ethics and compliance has never been more clear. It's got to be beyond mere compliance. It has to be about actualizing the human sensors in our organization, so that we can not only crowdsource risk and manage, not only so we can crowdsource risk management at scale and provide that insight at the point of risk, but to really reinforce that culture of integrity that allows people to feel included and feel confident that them putting their efforts toward the noble purpose of the organization are not going to be, they're not going to come back void. So we have to recognize that once our fundamentals are in place, which everybody here has some fundamental, or some foundation in place, our job is really about ascending beyond that and really building beyond that. So, there's no time where the impacts we can have can be as big as they can be right now. This is the first time in the existence of our industry where we can really move the needle and really leave our world better. So, the impact we can have is profound. Everybody here knows that. And I'm excited to dive in to really talk about how, these findings can be actualized within your own program. So in the chat, please keep these emojis coming. We're already at 385. Love you all. Haven't had lunch, so I'm hungry. Yeah, let's jump in. So Gio, why don't you walk us through the agenda, and we'll just start we'll start going here.
Yeah, hey everybody, glad to be here. Super excited to go through this with you today. This is a highlight of our year, and we hope that this helps you get some better insight into how to make that next best improvement for your program. So we're going to start out talking about the big issues, right? Issue days open. How long does it take you on average to close cases? Issue anonymity, and reporting channels where your reports coming in from. And then we're going to get into some deeper detail, talk about categories, the severity of the issues, and what portion of issues are substantiated. So kind of that second set of three gets you kind of deeper into some of the metadata that might help you figure out where you want to look for your best improvement. And then the last four are going to be on reporter types, who's reporting, employees or vendors or something like that. Awareness, how do they find out about the program? Sequence, how many follow-ups you're getting? And then the big winner at the end coming in strong with average reports per 100. For every 100 employees, how many reports are you getting against the benchmark? We got a lot to offer here. Nick, it's gonna be great.
We got a lot to offer. It's benchmark day, baby. All right, so here's the executive summary. Our job, if you boil it all down, is to do kind of three things: crowdsource risk intelligence at scale across the organization, provide insights and guidance at that point of risk, and build a culture of integrity that leads to business outperformance. That's what Compliance 3.0 is about. That's what this next era we're stepping into is about. That's the promised land we're going for. The problem is most teams are only accessing a fraction of the risk intelligence that exists within their employee base. Okay, people are 65% of people saw wrongdoing last year. The average, reporting rate is somewhere between 1.5 and 3.5 reports per 100. So where are all these other reports? Okay, employees, as I was saying in my preamble, employees care about an organization that is authentically trying to build a culture of integrity. They care about a noble mission, and they care about being part of an organization they can be proud of. But there is a retaliation problem in every company. ECI's report last year said that 46 or 40, essentially half of the people that spoke up faced actual retribution. Okay, so even if your organization is twice as better as everybody else, that's still 1 in 4 people. And I guarantee if I took a poll of how much retaliation is acceptable, everybody on this call would say it's 0. So how do we solve this? How do we crowdsource the risk intelligence and build this culture of integrity where people can feel plugged in? Well, the key is middle management. And as we go through these different data points, you're going to see that the influence of middle management on these metrics that determine or that can show the level of risk intelligence we're getting or the efficiency of our investigation process, all those things are linked together. And when middle management is part of this risk management apparatus, we can really drive some outstanding results. Because people are 6 to 8 times more likely to report to their manager. So there's all this risk intelligence out there. We're getting a scratch of the surface. We're going to dive in on how to get more of it. Okay, first metric. This is the big boy here. This is case closure time. Gio, what have we seen over the last few years from case closure, and what's been driving these fluctuations?
Yeah, so this is a great metric for the health of your entire system, right? This is like going and getting your blood pressure checked, because this can be a strong indicator. And what we've seen, we continue to see this spread and this difference against the broader industry benchmark, kind of 40 to 45 days, right? If you look at their benchmark report, you might say, hey, you know what? If I'm closing in, 46, 48 days, I'm kind of close to the benchmark. Well, what we see is the average within our data set has consistently, you see a lot of statistical significance here in that kind of 24 to 28 days, 22 to 28 days. And that's actually kind of bounced around that 22 to 24 over the past couple of years. So, you should be, we always encourage you as you look at these benchmark reports to take all of this with a grain of salt, right? Because we're not all representative of the average, but this should give you some indication of the direction you should be trending. If on average it takes you 65 days to close a case, well, you should see that there's a lot of strong evidence that there are ways that you can get that lower. But if you're in that kind of 20 to 30 range, then you're probably, around the average and can start looking at some of the other metrics we're going to be bringing up.
We made a big investment in the tool. As you know, this is not a thinly veiled sales presentation. Any Ethicsverse you come to, we try to steer as far away from that as possible. But we made some significant changes to our software tool. We started that in 2020. And as more and more folks have utilized more of those features, those smart workflows, those things that kind of reduce the amount of manual work that's necessary to, push a case toward conclusion, we've seen some significant drops in this average case closure time of about a full work week over these last few years. But this is just an average. You have to spin that sideways to see the distribution, and this tells a really interesting story. So as Gio said, we should always try to close cases as fast as possible, but no faster. We should, shoot for an average of case closure time of less than 30 days. But it's important to realize, obviously, that some investigations are going to take longer. So we never want to sort of just solve for a metric and just solve for, a dogmatic pursuit of some rule of thumb or some heuristic. But the point is, if we can if we can focus on closing cases faster, that's always going to be better, right? So you can see that the percentage of cases closed has kind of accelerated from about 3/4 to over 80% in that 0 to 30 bucket. And again, that coincided with that average change. But I think the over 90 bucket is kind of interesting because at one point there was 10% in there, and then now we're significantly under 5%. And usually that's where the most complex cases are. That's where the most risk is. And so there's been an interesting shift downwards. Forgot to mention this. All these orange lines are the status quo comparison from the NAVEX benchmark report. NAVEX report is coming out in a couple weeks, at which point be on the lookout for an update to our report. These 2023 numbers, you can see all the orange ones are a repeat of the 2022. So those can serve as a proxy, and we'll go ahead and update those as well. But we seek to have a single source of truth where you can have all the industry information in one spot. So if you have questions
Nick,
about this,
before we move on, we're getting some great people jumping in the chat. Thank you. Jump in the chat, have discussions amongst yourselves, and we'll pull some up for here. Nick, one question was, are these business days or calendar days?
These are calendar days.
Yeah. And back up a slide real quick. We had another great question. Thank you, Sangamitra, for jumping in. She was asking, kind of based on all of the benchmark data, do you feel like organizations are heading in the right direction? So I'll answer quickly, and I'd like to see what you think, Nick, and maybe we can circle back to this at the end. I think there's a lot of encouraging data coming from these benchmark reports that, yes, companies are moving in the right direction. I caution you to make sure that you take as comprehensive a view of these metrics as possible, because no one metric completely indicates your health. But we see in a bunch of different ways, you can see in the 90+ days case closure time that has trended down over the past 5 years. And we see a bunch of good things about people engaging more openly in the investigation process, and high instance of reporting like total cases, and people being more comfortable reporting without anonymity, and that leading to good substantiation. So in a bunch of ways, we see things trending in good directions, and we think that that's due to a bunch of things, not least of which our industry, like we were talking about earlier, we invest in ourselves, we build our network, we get better, and we're all getting better all the time. I think that the platforms and solutions that people are using to augment and make their work more efficient are helping a lot. And I see a lot of encouraging things from the trends in these benchmark reports. Anything to add to that, Nick?
Keep in mind that our progress here is not going to be linear. It's going to be more parabolic. And so while we're moving, along this line, the impact that comes from further progression expands over time. So as we go from a reporting rate of 3.5% in terms of the impact that has on the risk profile and the culture and ultimately the bottom line of the organization, as we go from getting 3 or 5 reports per 100 up to kind of that 20 and 30, when we can start pulling in more reports from middle managers, we really start to ride up that parabolic curve in a really, really meaningful way. So that's why I get so excited about this thing and this point that we're at in our industry, because like the next 10 years are going to look way different than the last 10 years. And so our job is, how do I pull what's going to happen 10 years from now? How do I pull that forward? How do I make that happen in 2 or 3 years? And just like everything, things happen little by little and all at once. And that's what that line that I'm drawing in the air with my hand is meant to represent. So as Gio said, your best benchmark always, and we'll probably say this 20 times throughout the presentation, your best benchmark always is your own data. Look at a time where things were normal. Those are always going to be the best points of comparison. And again, as Gio said as well earlier, this benchmark is just something to see at a really high level. What's the aggregate, what in aggregate is happening across all the companies that engage in this kind of a program. So if you're looking at your case closure time and it's higher than you'd like it to be, or you're in a continuous improvement mode and you want to pull that down, here's a couple of questions that you can ask. This first one is very basic, but it's like, what can I do to minimize case closure time? many times the momentum of a process or the momentum of the day-to-day or responding to, all the fires that come out, sometimes we can't even pick our head up from what we're doing and really zoom out and see the forest from the trees. Sometimes just sitting back and looking at this process and kind of breaking it down can find you can identify some bottlenecks. What improvements do you think you can drive in your case closure rate to help secure executive buy-in from a budget from a budget perspective for your program? Remember, part of your job is persuasion. Of course, we want to have dialed in, clear perspective about what progress we're actually making, but we also have to look externally on how we're being viewed by executives and those who control the purse strings. So throughout your case management systems and throughout your broad program, there's tons of data points that you can craft together to tell the right compliance story and to show where you're at on your compliance journey. So here are some tips. Gio, why don't you pull out a couple of your favorite tips? You guys are going to love this presentation. Full of tips, full of takeaways. Gio, what are your favorite case closure time tips? And don't take mine.
Yeah, we want to help you guys take action with this, right? It's great to be empowered with the data. Knowledge is power, but you need to put that power into action. So one great way to think about this is in any of these metrics, try to split it down some other way, right? So you don't want to just look at, hey, my case closure time is 44 days. That's not really that good. I need to get better. Break that down into its pieces, right? So we showed you a breakdown of under 30 days, 30 to 60, and 60 to 90 and 90 plus. So you can break that down and say, hey, you know what? Which of these are really far off? Okay, my under 30 days, whatever. They're taking 25 days to close. Maybe I can get those down 10 days and figure out how can I get those closed in 15 days. So we encourage you to take this Pareto process, right? Wilfredo Pareto came up with this idea called the 80-20 rule, and find the 20% where you can do some work and change that, and that's going to change 80% of your outcomes. So start with those easier, quicker cases. That's also going to blend some psychology with your team of cleaning out some of those things that are like hanging out there. You're going to get some quick wins with people in your organization who report, and you can get back to them quickly. And usually you have a lot more volume of those easier cases, right? Like the high risk cases are relatively rare. So if you can, take down a bunch of the count of your smaller cases, close those quickly, it also can free up some mental space for your team and reduce the cognitive load that it takes to get through the work.
His name was Fredo
Pareto. Process. We've all heard of the. I'm going to keep going. We've all heard of the garbage in, garbage out maxim. So you want to figure out what things in your intake process maybe are not allowing you to get through cases as well. Are you getting the data that you need? Do people feel comfortable reporting? Can they share the details that they need to help you?
My favorite ones are leveraging the technology. We did a study recently, and we've put out all these massive new features, all this input from people on the front lines. We built it, put it out, and the level of adoption is not as high as I would have expected. Some of these are massive needle movers in terms of feature, from a feature set perspective, and the adoption is not as high. So there's probably some features, there's probably some things in whatever platform you're on or whatever tool you're utilizing that you're not incorporating that could really move the needle. And then the other thing I kind of mentioned before, but like analyzing time factors, breaking this process down into its individual steps and finding the bottleneck is really the best way always to increase throughput through any complex system that has multiple steps. So the big takeaway here is look for bottlenecks that cause delays, look for workflow improvements using technology, training, or resources to optimize that case closure time. And drive more efficiency in your process. Remember, your investigation process is just a business process, just like every other business process. So you have to plan, do, check, act your way through it. And once you get that flywheel going and you get into that true continuous improvement mode, there's always something more you can do. There's always a bigger impact you can make, but you just have to get into that mode. Okay. Let's talk about issue anonymity. This is the other granddaddy. So we talked about the first granddaddy. This is your other granddaddy. This is a really, really critical one to dial in on because it gives us a glimpse into corporate trust. What's the aggregate level of corporate trust within our organization? Obviously, it moves in opposite directions, right? Those are negatively correlated. So as trust goes up, fear of retaliation goes down, anonymity rate goes down, and the reverse is true, if I can remember that. Okay, cool. So Gio, walk us through what's happened, and be sure to talk about that focus on empathetic elicitation that kicked off in 2019.
Yeah, exactly. So what we see here is we see that over time, if you look at the blue bars, the incidence of people being willing to identify themselves is going up. And, I think that a lot of that gets to the way that the intake is done. And what we've done at Ethico is starting in 2019, going into 2020, and certainly as we started getting into that pandemic, we really started retraining and leveling up our oversight and the support that we gave on that intake to be more empathetic. And we don't just ask questions. We don't just go through a checkbox of, ask these 5 questions and hurry up and get off the phone and charge some more money to the customer. We focus on getting the right information and doing an elicitation interview. That means dynamic follow-up, asking intelligent questions, and the intake reps need to kind of understand the nature of the calls that are coming in, and doing that empathetically. And we've seen that training that we started around that time really start to pay off and get what is a pretty significant jump. 5, 7, 8% increase in people willing to identify themselves on calls can really help you get better information at the start of your investigation, allow you to get clear substantiation of cases, and not just close it quickly, but do it right because you have the information that you need. I think it's relevant to a comment that Nancy made in the chat, is that, we see generally that when the reporter is anonymous, it may take longer to get through it. We see a split in that because sometimes, an anonymous report you can't do much with, but if it's important and you have to dig into it and you can't follow up with the reporter and things like that, that's likely to extend the total time for your investigation.
Yeah, and we see that, right? If something is submitted online or in person or hotline, the average differential between an identified and an anonymous call is kind of like averages out to about a work week when you put the proportions, from when you put the channel proportions in there, it's about a work week. So, that's why we're always talking about corporate trust, because your anonymity rate not only is kind of an output from, giving you a glimpse in the rear view of what the corporate trust is, it also influences, the speed of your case closure time. And it's a really significant thing, or it can be a really significant thing depending on the information that you're gathering. If it's just five quick questions, I would expect your anonymity rate your case closure rate between identified and anonymous to be even wider. Okay, so that's a great question. You can see here anonymity rate by issue category. There's no real surprises there. The lower rates are on things that are less risky. InfoSec. Nobody's really worried in general, of course. Nobody's really worried about retaliation from a privacy report. But when you're talking about human resource issues, or you're talking about discrimination, harassment issues, things like that, those are the things that end up having, and you can see here, the higher relative anonymous rates. But there was a great question from Sangham Mitra that says, are there any metrics or checks to measure that the decrease in case closure is not compromising the quality of the investigation? So that's a phenomenal question. None of these metrics can be viewed in isolation. These are just different facets of the same sort of 3-dimensional shape, and we're kind of looking at one facet at a time. But the best conclusions can be drawn when you start really triangulating one metric against another one, because to the point in that question, sometimes one thing can go down, or you can have a positive move in one metric, but it's really at the cost of another metric. So we kind of illustrate this dynamic, this interrelational dynamic between these metrics with a slide like this, because we had a conversation a year or two ago, and somebody said, I think my reporting rate is too low. What should my reporting rate be? And we responded and said, well, what's your anonymous rate? And how those two metrics interplay can lead to much different conclusions. So obviously, the worst place to be is down here on the bottom left, right? The bottom left is a really high anonymous rate. More than 65% of people, more than 50% of people, whatever, are not willing to be, identified. And we're getting less than two reports per 100. The ideal is, of course, on the other end of this table, where and everybody is reporting. We're getting a ton more of that risk intelligence that's out there, and no one is scared of retaliation because they are upstanders of a culture that is real. Okay. The important thing to note, though, as you're measuring these things, is try to kind of form a hypothesis on how you'd expect these metrics to move over time. The point being, you're not going to come diagonally from this red circle up to the green. You're probably going to move up as people try out the as people report more. They're going to kind of test out the process, and they're going to kind of lean into that self-preservation. So you're probably going to move up a chart like this before you move over. But again, as you just sit back for a moment and start to think about how are these numbers going to move, and how are these numbers really a reflection of the behaviors within the organization, you can really craft and tailor your approaches to drive the results you want. But that's a really phenomenal question. Thank you for that. Okay, so we kind of touched on this a little bit, but if you look at a low reported issue rate plus a high anonymity rate, what do you think, Gio, that's going to indicate to us?
So if you have a low rate of reporting, not a lot of people are speaking up, and the people who are speaking up very frequently say, hey, keep my name out of it. I don't want to be identified with this. You're dealing with two different challenges around the security really that people feel. There's so much of the speak up culture that is influenced by retaliation. And then you break retaliation down to retaliation that gets identified and dealt with, and or maybe dealt with by a regulator, actual retaliation that gets ignored, and then there's a huge pool of perceived retaliation or fear of potential retaliation. And all of those things would push you in this direction. A bunch of people keeping their hand down and saying, hey, I'm not going to speak up. And some of those brave souls that are willing to dip their toe into the compliance office, say, hey, wanting you to know about something, but I don't want to be involved. So both those things kind of indicate a constriction on people's willingness to jump in and speak up. Now, obviously, you could say, oh, no, it's fine because we don't have any issues. We only have about 2% of issues a year or something like that. But by and large, you want to at least be asking, hey, is this indicating a problem? And then as you get healthier, like we were saying on that chart, you're going to probably move up or to the side, right? Either people are going to still not be speaking up a lot, but some of those people are going to say, hey, I heard someone reported anonymously. It wasn't that bad. You can follow up with me. Or you're going to get more people speaking up, and that anonymity rate is going to stay there, right? This is kind of our likely path. And then as that anonymous reporting, people are reporting more, but anonymously, if you can over time, you can change that culture and make people more comfortable reporting and being identified because they trust that their ethics and compliance team is not going to, lead them into a trap.
And if I could wave a magic wand and affect, if I was over an individual program and I could affect one of these metrics that are on the screen, I would absolutely be driving toward more reports because people just need to engage in the process, go through that cycle in order to kind of establish that trust, right? The anonymity is a function of the distrust. So as that trust is built through more reports, I think that rate will come down. Great points, great questions. Keep them coming. These emojis have kind of slowed down a little bit, so I'm getting a little bit edgy here. Just kidding. But just remember that in our current climate, a lot of folks are looking for jobs. The cost of changing jobs is lower than it's ever been. Labor mobility is higher than it's ever been, and toxic cultures are a huge contributor to these massive attrition rates and this huge cost of turnover that our organizations are facing. Thank you, guys. Now I'm feeling really good again. Okay, cool. All right, so if you see my eye twitching a little, just know I'm getting a little edgy, okay? All right, so anonymity rate. You got to lead by example. Leaders have to report issues. We have to tell folks that these protections are in place. We have to convince and we have to persuade the human censors in our organization to voluntarily participate in our risk management, activities. So explain the importance of details, let them know the information you need and say, hey, I have, we're spending money. We have a protection in place. We want to hear from you. Here's what the process is going to look like. You're more than welcome to stay anonymous. We want to hear about the things that you're seeing. We want to take care of those things. Here's what the process looks like. And this is what we need from you. So if you're going to engage, again, it's a communication thing. It's getting people familiar and accustomed to and, understanding how this interaction is going to go. As that guard comes down, you're just going to get more of that risk intelligence because, again, we're scratching the surface. And again, it's not going to grow linear. It's going to grow little by little, then all at once. So here are some tips. the more we can promote a culture of psychological safety, the more we can reiterate that people's voice matters, that we want to hear what's going right, we want to hear what's going wrong, the more risk intelligence we're ultimately going to get. Sometimes that can seem like an insurmountable thing, because how can I wave a magic wand and just make my whole company of thousands of people or dozens of locations have this culture of psychological safety? Don't let the insurmountability of that prevent you from starting local. You can start local on your team. You can start local with the people that you interact with on an investigation basis. Really reinforce that culture of psychological safety, even through that investigation itself, through your actual interactions with them. Little things stack up over time. Little changes in habits stack up over time and generate massive results. So don't let how big that mountain is stop you from, engaging in this and trying to change it. What are the other
about this as we transition into the next section? I think is that one of the most challenging things about this speak up culture thing is that you need to rely on the influence of hundreds and likely, dozens of thousands of human beings in order to get them to engage here. What we're not able to do is lean on our authority or say that there's a regulation and force people to do this. So we need to advocate for them. We need to get them comfortable. We need to give them information and give them examples and make sure there are experiences around the organization that show that regardless of what you've read about in the news, regardless of what you've seen on TikTok, regardless of what happened to your friend at your last job, here's how we do it here. And you need to give people a bunch of information and a bunch of data points and a bunch of reasons to say, hey, maybe I'll trust that. And you can use psychological safety. You can use, behavioral economics, and you can use just communication strategies to influence this group of people who we have to rely on rather than kind of telling them what they need to do. We need to rely on them to trust us.
All right. So what's the key for anonymity, Ray G?
So the key is providing some options, making sure people are informed, and over time, building trust. Really, the key is the trust. You should know the trust equation and understand how your reliability and what much they know you and the things that you've done in the past or they've experienced are going to really influence the trust that they have to the organization writ large or the ethics and compliance department. And the best way to show that trust is to demonstrate, show and tell, right. Show it again, positive outcomes. You need people to see. You need to be countering the anchoring that they have because, if it bleeds, it leads, right? Like sensationalism and bad outcomes get a lot of attention, and that's happening throughout your culture. So if someone hears about something bad happening, that's going to spread like wildfire, and you need to be dropping these seeds of trust and explaining how positive outcomes have helped the whole organization and how whatever risk you perceive in reporting is massively outweighed by the benefit to the tribe and benefit to the in-group of speaking up.
I'm just kind of glancing through this chat. I freaking love the Ethicsverse. I mean, this chat is crazy. There's so many tips in this. I mean, we can turn this whole chat into an ebook. Thank you guys for sharing those things. So many great perspectives in there. Okay, reporting channel use. So this is a really important one. They're all important, right? Reporting channel use here. This shows the proportions of reports that come through these three main channels, right? You have your hotline, you have your web kind of, mobile intake, and then you have in-office, in-person, coming directly to the compliance office or the ethics office, coming directly to HR, coming directly to a manager. So these are the three channels. This is where 80, 90, 100% of your cases are coming through. And so what you can see is that we saw a pop in 2020 and 2021, up above that kind of 3.5 level. This was in the thick of COVID, and there was a ton of those, safety and, reports. We saw a massive spike for those years. As things have sort of normalized in 2022, we're coming back to office. It dipped a little bit, and it's kind of coming back toward that historical rate. So in aggregate, we had 3.6 reports per 100 versus the status quo, which would say the number is 1.5 reports per 100. You again can see those proportions. Okay, now let's look into these stacked bars here, because I think they tell an interesting story. So the two big takeaways here are, over the last few years, mobile has doubled. Okay, so it's been, in 2021, 19, 2021, it was kind of at 10%. That's jumped up to 20%. You'll see a little bit later from an awareness perspective, the amount of awareness that's coming from just straight up internet versus these other kind of historically, larger sources has skyrocketed as well. So it's critical that you're able to meet people where they're at and have an easy way for people to report through something that's not cumbersome, right? Something that's dynamic, simple, but gets you the information you need so that you can address it. So the more effort you can put into that, the more you can, again, step out of your process and look at it from a higher perspective, or look at it from an outside perspective. You might find some opportunities on how to drive that reporting rate up. Okay. The other thing is look at in-office, in-person. Again, that compression during 2020 and 2021, you would expect, right, where everyone's remote, you're not bumping into your manager in the hallway as often. And so we saw a massive compression of the, the in-office reporting. That is starting to revert back to some of these historical levels. In 2018, we saw about a third of reports were coming from that in-office. But again, this just reinforces what we're talking about. People are 6 to 8 times more likely to come to their manager than to use an anonymous hotline option. This is per ECI. 65% of people witness wrongdoing, and then we are only finding 3-5 cases per 100 within our case management system. So there's a ton more out there. And again, utilizing those folks, pulling those middle managers, those people that are, the most direct or who have the most direct impact on the employee experience, bringing them into the process and helping and getting them to help you harvest more of that risk intelligence is such a massive opportunity. We're not going to get into this reporting channel across sizes. You can dive into that within the report just for a time perspective. You know what? We're probably not going to get through this whole thing. Well, we're absolutely not, because this is like tons of slides and there's 10 metrics. So I'd love to hear some votes in the chat of whether we should have a part 2 of this. Would love to do it, but I don't want to shortchange this stuff because I think these things are pretty important. And I'm also kind of an investigation nerd. So anyways, reporting channel. So think about how you can improve your reporting channel. Every employee base is a little bit different, right? So how are people access, what tools do people have? Do they just have cell phones? Do they have laptops? Things like that. Getting some roundtables from people at different levels in different locations within the organization can give you some insights, especially if you can follow up with roundtables on identified callers to get some insights on how your outreach can be more effective. Gio, let's dive into the tips here. So give us your favorite reporting channel tips, please.
So let's jump to web intake, because we were just talking about how that has kind of fluctuated. Listen, right? Everyone's getting more mobile, more tablets, more digital. I'd encourage you to rethink and reimagine what a good reporting process looks like, because if you adopted your case management and investigation in web form 5 or 10 years ago, think about the iPhone that came out 10 years ago. Think about, TV, like what quality TVs were in 2014. All of this technology has gotten a lot better. And the same thing we were talking about earlier about how we did empathetic elicitation in our hotline and saw better reporting, better outcomes, better information to start the case, and then cases closing faster. You should apply that same view to your web reporting and your digital reporting channels, making sure that it's user-friendly, making sure that it's simple and intuitive. A bunch of people on our platform have implemented compliance portals in a single place where everyone can go to find different reporting forms and get linked to things that matter to the compliance program, and also dynamic forms that, instead of just asking generalized questions, that can be driven by the category that somebody says, or somebody gives a certain answer and you say, well, if you said yes to that, I have 3 more questions. And do what you can so that your digital intake both is user-friendly for the person reporting and also represents as much as possible what your investigation process should look like. And what we should be doing over time is closing the gap between what can happen in a walk into the compliance office and sit across my desk and tell me what's going on. Close the gap between that and what comes in on a web form. 5-10 years ago, those things were worlds apart because the web form was very dumb, and obviously your compliance team is very smart. Let's make your digital intake smarter so that those people who are bound to report digitally get more comfortable.
Wendy just said something brilliant, shocking, right? Let me read this to you. I'd be concerned if you're mostly hearing stuff through exit interviews. Why are they not speaking up while they're employed, or are they speaking up and not being heard or listened to? Nothing's happening or changing, or they don't know what's happening to impact the issue. Was the remediation not effective? Was it not communicated, right? I find state interviews give more information and people feel more heard and like they can be part of the change for the better. I mean, if I was running this, a program like this, I would have all those. I would have stay interviews. I would have exit interviews. I would build that into the process. I would try to maximize those, and I would be trying to gather as much risk intelligence there is, because again, the number one thing that's, to Wendy's point, the number one thing that's preventing people from speaking up is this fear of retribution. Half of people are experiencing it. Okay, so when are they going to be most apt to share? Well, when that fear of retribution is gone. So, or if you have a state interview that is part of a process that there's a lock solid, Chinese wall to maintain protection, that'll let us pull forward some of the risk intelligence sooner that may prevent somebody who's a flight risk from actually leaving. So phenomenal point. Your job is to, again, get that risk intelligence. You got to crowdsource it. You can do it from a voluntary perspective, somebody calling in on something they see, or you can do it from a sort of a compulsory perspective by enrolling somebody in a state interview campaign. A lot can come from that. I would say to train managers on proxy reporting, our case closure times for someone reporting to their local manager should not be significantly different than them coming directly to a compliance officer, which means you either want to train those people with a little guide to say, hey, make sure you get this information, Mr. Manager, or you want to have a web form that's dynamic enough so that it can be kind of dummy proof. Okay. So think about how you can utilize those folks, because again, that's where all the oil in them hills are. Okay. The middle manager risk intelligence, that's what you got to get at. And again, that's why, we had Matt Silverman on, because he was all about building, a couple weeks ago, we were talking about building a network within the organization, and bringing more people into the risk management process drives phenomenal results. And then you don't feel like you're trying to block all these shots with no defenders. Okay. Keep publicizing those options. Providing multiple access points is critical. And talking to those managers, like, listen, if people are 6 to 8 times, 65% of people saw something last year. If people are 6 to 8 times more likely to go to their manager, well, then I should be able to look at all the proxy reports submitted and bounce that up against a list of all managers and find the people that have submitted no reports. Those people have to be hearing something, or those people are kind of a problem from a management perspective because nobody's coming to them. They clearly haven't generated any local trust. So again, when we're talking about our case management system and this risk management apparatus, there's so much data in there to direct our efforts towards the things that are actually going to move the needle. Okay, I'm going to get off the management.
Nick, can we jump back to the first slide of the section? I just want to make a point. As we're talking about tips and how to maximize this, what you guys want to do, like we talked about earlier, is break this down into its component pieces. And there's something you can do to build strength on your web form, right? We talked about making your web form smarter and easier to access. And people are finding, when we get to awareness, people are finding that just by Googling it, not going on the intranet or going to their policy. So what can you do in the web form process? What can you do in Office? What can you do for your hotline? Because you can see it here. The people within our network on our platform are outperforming the average team that's working on the status quo comparison on every one of these metrics. And you can build strength in each of these. And I just want to reinforce that proxy piece. And Nick, we can flip to the next section as I wrap this up. But that the people on our platform that are being the most successful, the most dynamic, building forward the fastest, we're seeing a bunch of them start implementing this proxy form process. It should be relatively easy. I know it is for Ethico to spin up another report, another web form, and you can put a bunch of personalization on that to guide managers through how to do an elicitation interview when obviously they're not trained like your investigation team to do that intake. And getting that is a great way to bind into the managers that are on your team. And instead of relying on hopefully the employee also brings it to us, or hopefully the manager says, yeah, good to know, I'll talk to that person, but you should probably go talk to the ethics department. Give them their own proxy form instead of just sending the employee to the web. Give them their own proxy form and they can do some intake for you. And you can start building allies throughout the organization. Ethical allies are going to be your key to get into that mood in the middle, which is really the way that organizations are changed, by the sub and micro cultures run by individual managers. And those proxy forms are a great way to start aligning with them.
And it's so much more effectable because it's a smaller group of people. But the challenge is, how do I identify those groups that might need some cultural help or some psychological safety help? Putting this kind of manager proxy form type of a thing in place can give you some early signals on where you might need to divert your focus. So pause right now. We're going to kind of talk a little bit about vision. So you guys who have come here, you've probably heard about this before. This is the industry lifecycle framework for, the ethics and compliance through 3.0 framework. So what this is describing is different phases of our industry. And so let's talk about 1.0. 1.0 is all about risk avoidance. This was when, your title was no title. Someone from legal was like, hey, you smart person, hard worker, go ahead and figure out this compliance stuff. The focus was risk avoidance or penalty reduction, right? Keeping the company out of trouble. Over time, we got actual titles. Imagine that. Now we're called compliance officers, and we have compliance departments, and we have tools. And the focus in this phase, as we've gone from baby stage to adolescence, is really about efficiency, and we're trying to drive efficiency down. Along the way, we've accumulated these these stereotypes or these like scarlet letters of us being the office of no and being a cost center and people who don't get business and, the anti-business department, all of those, derogatory stereotypes that you've all heard and that you're probably fighting against, inside your organizations. Here, we're kind of backward looking, we're kind of reactive. And so the reason we're talking about this, though, is really to get to this 3.0, because I believe if you don't have a vision for what you want to be, if you don't have a vision for your life or your future self or where you want your program to go, you're never going to wander there. Like nobody wanders to the top of the podium at the Olympics and just, oh my gosh, I'm getting a gold medal. This is crazy. No, they've envisioned that. They saw that vision year after year. And if you don't have a clear picture of where you're trying to go, your odds of arriving there are way lower. Okay. So the promised land is a 3.0 where we're more proactive, we're brought in earlier, we're viewed as this strategic lever in our organization. We're ethics and compliance executives that understand the bigger picture and how these different components and departments and so forth interact with each other in pursuit of our organization's mission. And we're able to overlay, a risk lens to help our business run down the road faster. That's really what it's about. So don't forget that this exists. Don't forget that this reality can be achieved, but you have to really, you have to really paint that picture in your mind. And once you can do that, you're going to start to find opportunities in your program, in your various business processes to drive the improvements that are going to make this 3.0 a reality. It's not that hard to cross the Jordan River into that promised land. But you got to have a picture of that promised land to get moving. Okay, issue categories, we're going to go kind of quick through. We did we went back through all of our categories. We standardized them, normalized them. Obviously, everybody has a different taxonomy. The big story here is that customer relations business quality has gone up. We've also seen a pop of 2% in compliance and regulatory. Discrimination and harassment is up another %. But look at fraud, theft, and property damage. Again, stuff like this, think about what is affecting these categories. Just like we saw, environmental health and safety skyrocket during the pandemic because that was top of mind for everybody. Everybody had questions about policies and things like that. As we've moved into this, this relatively more difficult economy, we see a movement in fraud, theft, and property damage. The difficult economic conditions are prompting and driving more, wrong behaviors. So look for correlations between what's in the headlines, what is top of mind for folks, and see where those things are showing up inside of your, reporting process. Okay, we've tallied the results. Round of applause. We are going to do a round 2 of this, so we can slow down and we can kind of savor the flavor here. But thank you, everybody who voted. Let's talk about issue categories. I think there are some interesting things here. If you break out kind of who's reporting into the main 3 categories, you obviously have employees, you have customers, and you have vendors, depending on how your intake is set up. And so there's some interesting takeaways here. About half of the issues are split between kind of, HR and discrimination and harassment and retaliation. 10% of your reports are discrimination. If 10% of your reports are discrimination and harassment, and you remember those other metrics that I talked about, that people are, scared to report, and we have low reporting rates and all those kinds of things, then it's probably a reinforcement to the point we made in the beginning that there's probably a retaliation issue in your organization. An anti-retaliation campaign is literally the most effective thing you can do to, kick off a phase shift in the way your program interacts with the workforce. It's the elephant in the room. Half of the people are experiencing it. And again, retaliation, whether it's real or fake, is a moot point. It's all about the eye of the beholder. So if somebody was retaliated against in their last organization, they're going to bring some of that ethical baggage or bring some of that workplace baggage and probably be less prone to report. We have to figure out a way to actualize those people. And we have to figure out a way, to Gio's point from before, to show them that our organization is different. We have to do that in a demonstrable, sort of a tangible way. So anyways, I'm going to put one foot off of my discrimination, harassment, and retaliation soapbox. Gio, what else do you gather from this?
Yeah, so before I jump in, I want to get to a couple comments because I love people clarifying this stuff. One question that's a little bit appropriate to this is this just issues coming to ethics and compliance, or does that include HR, legal, and other organizations? Generally, these are all of the issues that compliance touches. Some of those are things that go to HR and get rerouted to them. Some of those things get rerouted to legal. More and more, we're seeing people use a platform like the Ethico ecosystem to pull in those other organizations and share access to those things. So that what you want to do is, instead of siloing your reporting channels and just being like, well, if it's an HR issue, bring it over there. And if you understand what exactly defines a legal issue, bring it over there. People should be agnostic to how they report, where they report it, and it should be on our team to reroute those issues. And we're really encouraged when we see the best in class customers we work with. Those are the people that engage with their account manager, come to our roundtables, give us input on new features and things like that, because they're always looking for ways to get better. Our best in class customers on our platform, they're really looking for ways to increase the integration with other departments, and we can do that through an API. You can do that through routing issues, setting up different web forms and stuff like that. But this is generally comprehensive for those things, but obviously it depends on how each individual company kind of routes their issues. And there was another question.
I would say the best practice is to have some single source of truth. I think whoever's managing risk should have that source of truth. That's just my sort of biased opinion. But leveraging that and having a single warehouse, and then leveraging smart technology to push those cases to the other folks, whether that's connecting to their system or giving them a notification for them to come into your native system. Any way you kind of cut it is fine. But again, go back to what is the goal? The goal is to, what's the risk of our organization? How can I provide the right insights, or how can I put out those right fires? And how can I persuade the employee base that our commitment to this culture of integrity is real? That's what our game is. And it's hard to do that when you just have a little slice of the pie, or you're looking through one of those like pinhole viewers that you built in fourth grade to look at an eclipse. Okay, it's hard to see the world through a pinhole, and it's hard to manage or have a sense of the risk of the organization when you're just seeing a little piece of it. Okay, so remember, 10% of the cases or 10% of the reports were ethics and compliance reports. Let's dive into breaking that apart. Rodrigo, who loves you? Okay, so you can see here the biggest chunk here is about a quarter were code of conduct violations. The next one is conflicts of interest. Okay, so about 20% were conflicts of interest. We've seen an interesting trend in the conflicts of interest proportion over the last several years, and we believe that that's due to this new generation coming in that's more vocal and more attuned to unfairness. Okay, we prioritize unfairness, we prioritize inclusion and things like that a lot higher. So we're kind of tuned into it, and we seem to notice it a little bit more. So again, there's so much potential risk intelligence out there. You have human sensors that want to participate in this thing. We have to make it easy for folks to do that. And by utilizing, proxy forms like Gio was saying, or utilizing a conflicts of interest kind of distribution and intake module. That is smart, easy to use, and so forth, can get you more of those, because I guarantee there's a lot more conflicts of interest things happening than 20%, okay? You can see here, Rodrigo, you were asking about bribery, corruption, and so forth. That was about 4%. And then if you look at this sort of broad bucket, and then again, 4%, and then depending on whether you want to incorporate this 15% for misrepresentations of falsifications, depending on where you want to draw that line. I think there are some interesting things here. And again, it presents some really interesting opportunities. So we have a full commentary of these things in the full report, which if you haven't downloaded yet, what are you waiting for? But let's dive into, Gio, some tips about issue categories.
Yeah, so we're always going to say that you should break this down and see. I think it's easy to start with a comparison to our benchmark report. Where am I against that? But also look in the rear view at where you were before and see how are things changed. So this first one, are there spikes and concerns that correlate with external events impacting your business? Right? If there was a crisis in one of your regions, or you just did a new acquisition or whatever, then you should look at those events to see if they're causing some of these spikes. You want to be looking at, hey, what were we doing a year ago, or what were we doing quarter over quarter? We allow people to do that with the touch of a button and even compare periods and eco reports on our platform, because you guys, like, if you're an ethics and compliance pro, you should just have the information available to you. That's what we believe at Ethico. And we believe that, like, we love you guys, but we don't think you love like building reports in Excel. You should be able to get that quickly and be able to compare quarter over quarter, year over year, those, proportion and or count of different categories. So, new sites, new populations, what have changed about your organization, and how have you addressed that, right? So like those big changes, you open a new office or you do an acquisition or something, some of that might be noise in your system because, right, that old culture is still there, but also, that noise might be a challenge. There's also an opportunity there where, hey, there's a phase shift going on. There's a new group of people that are now part of our tribe. Let's figure out if we can redefine how they should consider ethics and compliance and what it means to win together. And then, this issue of like, what are your categories? Getting the metadata right and making sure that the list and the number and the definition of those categories in your set are a good representation of how you want to split these things up is going to be really important. And consider how those categories, and if you have them or want them, the subcategories and different ways that you define it, how are those going to impact your handoffs that you give or receive from HR, legal, and risk management?
You mentioned something, Gio. I got a lot of soapboxes in here today, so I'm going to step onto this one real quick. But you said, I'm sure you guys don't like spending all that time in Excel. And like, there is so much waste in the ethics and compliance industry. Why is ethics and compliance the last one to get new tools? Why do we have all these smart people who care, these hardworking people that want to make a difference in the world with a very specific, specialized skill set? Why are they spending so much of their time doing manual rudimentary work? The more time that somebody who has a specific, a unique skill set can apply that skill set in their job, obviously the easier it is to see the value that they bring to the table. So don't settle. Don't let the sunk cost fallacy. Don't let the status quo bias keep you from driving toward that 3.0 program that you deserve and that can really multiply your impact within your organization. Okay, last soapbox of the day, because guess what? We got 2 minutes left. Okay, so Gio said something that I just want to kind of double click on. Look at, here it is. Make sure your categories are comprehensive. We want to have as few categories as possible, but no fewer, okay? Meaning, if we have 1,000 categories, well, then we're not going to see any trends. If we have 2 categories, well, then we're not going to be able to draw any conclusions. So there's some healthy balance in the middle. Another point to make, and this might sound stupid, but if you should be looking at your categories every single year and seeing, can I tie these to different policies? Can I tie these to my code of conduct? And are the categories that I'm utilizing right now a clear representation of how we currently view the categorization of things coming through, our intake? And so what I mean by that is if you're making changes to your categories over time because you've combined, a separate discrimination and harassment policy into one policy, make sure that you're going back in your tool or make sure you're going back in your system and updating those historical categories. You have to combine those if you're ever going to retain that sort of time series ability to measure a trend over time. You need to make sure that that data is consistent. And again, leverage your tool. Like your tool, I'm sure, has a great dashboard that's easy to pull out, dynamic information where you're not, spending all this time in Excel. Leverage that stuff or reach out to your client success person to see what options are available in your tool that you're not utilizing that can help you, again, eliminate some of that busy work, eliminate some of that handwork, and really spend a larger proportion of your time putting your unique skill set to work. Okay. Okay, so let's talk about the big takeaway here for issue categories, and then we're probably going to wrap up because we're not going to have enough time to get to the next one. We will let you guys know when the part 2 will be, but Gio, take us out on this issue categories big key.
Yeah, listen, these categories can be a frustrating thing to deal with if there's a bunch of noise, or they can be a real empowering addition to a well-run program. So think about how you're designing your categories. Like we're operating a big system that puts its arms around the whole organization and tries to keep it safe and build a good culture. And we need to use the platforms and the systems that we have to make our jobs easier. So right. A, it should be easy to change your categories. This should not be a 6-month, $40,000 effort for you to do it. And B, you need to not get stuck in that sunk cost fallacy and say, hey, well, all of my trending from the past few years is going to be on this list of 27 categories. I don't want to give it up. Think about all the work and potential that you have going forward if you get your categories right. Setting your categories, thinking about what gets reported, where is a big category where everything gets dumped into this. I'd really like to pick that apart a little bit. It's going to enhance your data quality, and it's going to enable not just you to do the investigation better, but it's going to enable actionable insights that can drive down into the team that reports to you and drive up into the executive suite for them to see ethics and compliance department for the strategic enhancer that it really is. And all of this information, the benchmark report, a bunch of the ways that you can set a roadmap for how you can get better. And, especially on these categories, these can help you be a more effective compliance leader and help you win the day by making the world a better workplace.
Look at that. Andy stuck the landing. It's exactly one. So love you all. See all you Ethicuties next week. Download the benchmark report. We'll be sending around the slides and so forth. And hope you guys have a wonderful day, and we'll see you soon.
Thanks for coming, guys. Glad to be here.